a mix of public and internal meetings, and I think everybody's found it quite fruitful. So this final session today is intended to give you a bit of a taster of some of the work that FAIRsFAIR is doing to support repositories to become more FAIR enabling. So if we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So just a reminder, repositories are a real key actor in the ecosystem for realizing FAIR in a practical sense. So the role they play is certainly a major one. And to reflect that, FAIRsFAIR has 3 work packages that have repositories at the core of what we're doing. So we have work package 2, which is looking a little bit at the semantics and interoperability. Work package 3, which is focusing on data policy and practice, and work package 4, which is all about certification of repositories. So it's certainly a key target group for us to work with, and we will give you a little bit of a sense of what we're doing to try and get people started on their journeys towards FAIR. So if you can move to the next slide, please. Oh, I think we've missed one, but that's fine. So just to give you a brief sense of what will happen today, we've got 4 presentations. They'll be very short presentations. We will do each of the 4 in turn, and then we will have a dedicated session for questions and answers. So if you can just maybe add any questions or comments that you have into the chat as we go along, we'll keep an eye out for those and we'll collect them for the open session. What we'll do here is record the session. So if you don't want to be recorded, maybe just use the chat to communicate with us. Otherwise, when we get to the open session, please feel free to raise your hand and you can unmute and ask your question verbally. Just to let you know that the slides and the recordings will be made available from the FAIRsFAIR website after the session. So at that, I think I've covered all of the housekeeping rules, so I will now move over and hand it over to Robert Huber, who's going to give us 10 minutes on how to make your the fairness of your content, how you can assess the fairness of your repository content. So over to you, Robert, please.
Okay, thanks, Joy. I will try to share my screen. I think you have to, yeah. So, yeah. So this talk is about actual practical assessment of the fairness of your content, your data sets. And yeah, so the work I present here is or was carried out in the context of task 4.5, which was about fair data assessment of pilots. And the goal of this task was to assess the research data from trustworthy data repositories, which we used as pilots for, well, improving and developing the tool and the metrics. So here we have focused on research data, which is or was observed and collected or measured for scientific purposes. So this is a quite basic definition of research data. To achieve the goals of the task, we implemented 2 important components. First, we developed assessment metrics, and the second component was or were practical tools to perform these assessments. And both components are addressing priority recommendation of this turning FAIR into reality report. So here we followed a use case based approach. And we identified 8 different scenarios for assessments, which can be performed at different stages of the life cycle of research data. Of these 8 scenarios, we have chosen 2 scenarios as priority use cases. One use case is about raising awareness for research data, for fairness of research data. And the tool here is FAIRsFAIR, which allows self-assessment. And the other one is addressing assessment of research data after the data already has been archived in the archive, in a trustworthy data archives. And here we developed F-UJI. This tool is the focus of this talk today. But prior to assessing data, we needed to define metrics, and the metrics we specified were based on prior work performed during the FAIR.DAT and FAIR Enough projects and other projects, of course, and were aligned with the RDA data maturity model as well with the WDS, the World Data System, and RDA data fitness for use checklist. So we developed these metrics in an iterative process with several stakeholders, such as a number of data publishers, international initiatives such as OGC, RDA, WDS, and of course also together with the FAIR working group. As a result, we have defined 17 metrics, which are shown here and which can also be visited at the FAIRsFAIR website. These metrics are still open for comments, so if you have something or if you think we have some improvements to propose, please visit the website and make your comments there. The metrics actually follow this pattern, which is shown here. So they are organized in a hierarchical way. So first we focus on the FAIR principle, and for each principle we have one or more metrics which are actually tested by several practical tests. So this example here is the FSFF1 02D metric, which is about testing persistent identifiers, and the practical tests here are we look, for example, if the identifier is based on a persistent identifier scheme which we can verify, and the second test is if the identifier can be resolved. So this is testing if this actually is a real one. So the tool can be downloaded. It is open source software and published on GitHub, and we have a demo web page available on FUJI, which is written f-uji.net. So what FUJI actually does is it is using a URL or a persistent identifier as an entry point, and optionally you can also define a service like an Open Archives Initiative endpoint, and then FUJI is trying to visit that landing page and trying to extract metadata from that page, but it is also using some other technologies like content negotiation, or is following linked other links identified in the metadata of which FUJI has found here to download additional metadata you offer, and it is also using the what I mentioned, this Open Archives Initiative endpoint to identify if you have, for example, made discipline-specific metadata available. So this is more or less the top-level flow. In detail, this is much more complicated and is following the flow more or less what I showed based on the metrics we defined. So FUJI actually is a web service, and it is offering a REST API, which is based on the Open API specification and implemented using Swagger and Flask in the Python language. So the example here shows how an output looks like. It is offering a JSON formatted output, which is indicating the result of each metric and tests. And in addition to the results of the test, it is also offering quite verbose debug messaging, which gives you an overview of what actually has happened during the test. In addition to this web service, which is not so easy to handle for humans, we also now developed a demo web page based on these web services, which you can visit here at FUJInet. I mentioned that already. So this is a graphical output of the test result, which makes it easy for you to, for example, test individual data sets based on the PID. So the only thing you need to do is to enter this ID here in this field and click on Run Tests, and then FUJI will show you the result. FUJI was designed to improve fairness of data, and it's not only a testing tool, but we use these metrics and test results to improve fairness. Initially, we did it for 5 trustworthy pilot repositories. For each repository, about 500 data sets have been assessed using FUJI, and this assessment was combined with an in-depth consulting process, which included phone conferences, email, and so on. So we used this to identify gaps and opportunities for improving fairness. And in this iterative process, the repositories we assessed were in most cases able to improve the fairness. Here is an example from Pangaea, for example, which this is an example of the report we produced as a result of these assessments, which included comments and action item lists and so on. So as a result here in this example for Pangaea, we could improve fairness as indicated here by these bar charts. For example, the accessibility metrics could improve from about 0 to, well, the score 1. And also other fair principles could improve during the assessment. So this was one example of these. So the lessons we learned is that automated fair assessment of research data objects actually is possible, and we can support a very large and diverse community because most of the fair implemented FAIR technologies are domain independent. We demonstrated this using 5 pilots, and in the meantime, also other initiatives joined, and we were in contact with them and performed some assessments and consultations to improve their fairness. So in summary, the best use formula for FUJI is to use the tool in combination with a ideally face-to-face fair consulting process. So thank you. This was the overview, and the last screenshot here is just to show that FUJI is not the only tool we developed in 4.5, but also the FAIRware tool.
That's great. Thank you very much, Robert. I mentioned we would try to keep all the questions to the end, but we did have one come in, and maybe while we're doing the transition between you and Robert Ulrich, you can just answer it. We've had a question from Karsten asking, FUJI is still in development, but is there a way to keep updated on the tool status and to redo assessments if they want to? Is there some way that people can keep in the loop on that?
Yeah, the best way is to follow the progress on GitHub, where in case updates or new versions are released, this will be announced there.
Great. Okay. And I think in the meantime, Robert Ulrich has seamlessly gone into his presentation mode, so that's great. So we'll move straight from that talk, and we will now go into a little bit of work that is being done within the FAIRsFAIR project to make your repository more visible. So over to you, Robert.
So can you see my screen?
Yep, everything looks good.
Okay, I'm Robert Ulrich. I'm working at the KIT, and we are hosting Data for DataCite, and we are here in the project together, and I represent the current work, making the repositories a little bit more visible in the end, and talking here together with Sarala, and so she might jump in if there's something missing. So, And we are also supporting here the work in FAIRsFAIR and the work package 4 to foster fair data practices in Europe. And together we are building services and going to provide tools for the discovery of fair enabling repositories to researchers and other stakeholders. And one we have already heard that is building up on our services. And with that, we are a little bit at the end of the chain, incorporating the outcomes and results from the other outputs, work packages. With that, what is the current status quo? So originally, when the project started, we planned to extend the repository finder, which is hosted by DataCite, and it's an easy tool to discover repositories that are somehow fair enabling. And with that, in the first step, we incorporated the first selection criteria here, which are basically that the repository should provide open access, so the data is visible, it can be reused, and so it should also be citable and referenceable, so there should be a persistent identifier, and in the best case, the repository should be certified. And with that, DataCite, in the meantime, launched its platform DataCite Commons, which probably most of you already know. So this is a discovery service where you can find many works. You can find people referenced by ORCIDs. You can find organizations referenced by ROS. So in general, this is the service building up on to explore the PID graph, to make the links discoverable, and to provide a deeper insight in the research landscape. And with that, it is planned to transition the repository finder into DataCite Commons, so that also the repositories are linked to the different entities. And here you can see a short mock-up of the planned platform. So for now, you see the works, the people and the organizations, and with the upcoming work, the repositories will be integrated there. So you can discover the platforms and infrastructure and also related entities. And as for now, re3data is the data source behind. So re3data, for those of you who don't know, is a global registry of research data repositories. Currently, we have 2,600 repositories in. We cover all academic disciplines. We represent repositories and portals that provide permanent storage and access to research data, and also promote a culture of sharing, increased access and better visibility. And being the back end of the repository finder, we will also support the upcoming features in the DataCite Commons platform. And so with that, we do changes to our platform that then Commons can build up on. One of the first important things that also is worked on work package 4 is to provide a better description of the certification within re3data. So we will extend our metadata schema on that regard, that especially we can support some kind of fair amendment by CoreTrustSeal, and especially that we have a date range so that the information within re3data is also up to date. And this has been proposed by CoreTrustSeal, and we are also planning to integrate an API for CoreTrustSeal, so that CoreTrustSeal, or the WDS, is basically the certification authority and can update the records in time. So that is always good information that you find within re3data. And then that's also up to date in DataCite Commons. Another important part is to provide a better understanding on the API side. So we are building up on work package 2 here, which is fostering the fair data points within the repositories, and is making reuse of re3data as a vocabulary within the RDF space, and we want to make those URIs resolvable so that whenever you go over it with a crawler or a machine readable tool, that it's basically discoverable. With that, we also discussed that there's a common standard that most tools and other ones rely on, which is DCAT, a catalog description within the RDF space. That's also something we want to make more visible and better described within our metadata, so that, for example, the F-UJI tool might also build up on and connect the data sets with the repository infrastructure. And most important, integrating Re3 data within DataCite Commons. We want to link the existing PIDs with the repository entities. So collecting raw identifiers, ORCIDs and others within our metadata schema, so that it then can be embedded within the PID graph and actually make the whole thing work. In addition to that, we are also introducing a new profile as a property. As you have seen in the beginning with the repository finder, we have a selection for FAIR enabling repositories, which is currently not reflected within the repository metadata. So we want to materialize this within our schema and within our platform, and also enable a faceted search for the FAIR enabling repositories in DataCite Commons, because that makes it a lot easier for researchers to discover and select repositories that are following the FAIR enabling criteria that are developed within FAIRsFAIR. So within here you see a little mock-up how this will look like. So Commons will be the front end and will query Re3 data, and Re3 data will deliver the descriptions to Commons as a consumer. And with that, I'm at the end of the talk here. And as the integration is on the roadmap at DataCite, feel free to provide feedback here. So have a look at the repository search in DataCite Commons card at the product board. So Sarala will take care of and incorporate feedback from all of you. So we heavily rely on your support and your input to build the right tools that actually foster your use cases. And also, if you have any other questions or want to update your repository entry or anything else, feel free to contact us, either Re3 Data or DataCite. And with that, thanks for listening.
Great, thank you very much, Robert. And I'm very impressed. Everybody has kept exactly to time this morning, so well done on that. I see there's been a little bit of chat, so while maybe Claudia is setting up just before we move on to the next talk, I know there's been a bit of chat for Robert, and I think maybe we can pick that up in the open Q&A session. So Susanna and Alison, maybe we can come back to your questions in that session. So next we'll go over to Claudia Benke, who leads work package 2 in FAIRsFAIR, and she's now going to give us a sense of what we're doing in the project to try and help repositories become more interoperable. So over to you, Claudia.
Thanks a lot for the possibility to also talk here. I hope you see my screen.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, perfect. So you should see something which is said digital objects, because I always try to start a bit from the beginning. So I will talk about how to make your repository more interoperable, and to have something that is interoperable, I want to start with like a mini definition of a digital object, and I can be here really brief because both Roberts have already used quite some terms that I will use as well. So if I look at the details, what a digital object is, we have, of course, the bitstream, the files like a text file or a picture, and this bitstream is hopefully in your case connected with a persistent identifier, and as said, Robert Huber already talked a lot on the need of persistent identifiers. And the third aspect, and this is what I will focus on, is that usually a bitstream or the digital object will have metadata, and you can have multiple types of metadata. I just used here one example. This is not the only example in the world. And if we now link this digital object and we want to not make it a digital object, but a FAIR digital object, we can map the FAIR principles to the things that we see here. So if I just start and I say, okay, well, the F1, which already Robert mentioned, is, okay, we need to have a persistent identifier. We need to have a globally unique persistent identifier assigned to the digital object. This is makes it FAIR enabling. Okay, so far so good. If we now look at, for example, the F2, we see, okay, structured metadata is described, the data set is described with rich metadata. And if I would now, I don't go over all of them, start adding all this FAIR principles, you will see that a lot of them are actually focusing or have something to do with metadata. And this is always my starting base. If I say, okay, let's assume you have within your repository already the fairest data set in the world. So everything when it comes to metadata, you have added, it's all like as good as you can have it. And now we take this digital object and we put it in a repository. And what will happen now is we can ask the question, how much of the fairness do you expose still within your repository? So let's assume we have the digital object, you have it in your repository, it's stored there, and well, you will enhance the fairness. For example, if you look at F4, you will say, okay, the metadata is registered or indexed in a searchable resource. This is exactly what you do if you put it in a repository. So this is something that enhances the fairness. And also if we think of, for example, the accessibility. So if you have a tombstone record within your repository, you also increase the fairness of your digital object. But now if I'm thinking of a real use case, so let's assume there's a researcher and the researcher wants to find the data set. He wants to discover maybe the data set. The easiest use case is the researcher know, there is a data set in a repository. He's querying based on maybe a graphical user interface, based on the descriptive metadata, and he will find the repository, the data set. Great. The problem is if the researcher doesn't know where this data set is. There might be multiple repositories that might hold the data set. Okay, what the researcher can do, that he can by hand query the next repository. You see that here my descriptive metadata changed the language because for some reason, maybe the descriptive metadata was put in German. Okay, so if you are lucky, the researcher maybe speaks German and English, so he still has a chance finding the data set. But let's assume the metadata is in Russian, then, well, for some people it gets easier. For me personally, it gets more difficult. I will not be able to find a data set where the metadata is in Russian. And well, this problem, of course, gets multidimensional if I don't know even that there is this one data set, but I want to be able to combine multiple data sets. So you see that especially the interoperability of the metadata, and this is exactly what I will focus on, is a crucial thing to make your data fair. This is, of course, in a sense, again, a mock-up, because a researcher will not by hand query multiple repositories in the world, but the reality is more, yeah, exactly, the interoperability question. So the data set might not be findable. And this, again, is, of course, a bit a mock-up because a researcher will not query multiple repositories by hand, but the reality is more that a researcher might use a metadata aggregator or might use a machine, or a machine itself will try to access the repositories. So the researcher gives the metadata to the repository and to the metadata aggregator, and the metadata aggregator will access the APIs of the repositories and will look and try to query the APIs. However, if the metadata is just not well structured, the information might be lost because the crawler will never be able to find the information in this repository. And this is exactly when a fair data point, and this is what I will talk about in the next 5 minutes, comes handy, because yeah, if we want to make the metadata machine actionable, we need to make sure that it's also structured and that it's accessible for a machine and that the machine can understand it. And then we come also later back to this question of language, because if we can have metadata that is semantically enhanced, I don't have this problem anymore that I don't speak the language of the metadata, because if I have a semantic enhancement of the metadata, it doesn't matter which language the metadata is in. So let's think of the repository. Again, we have here one example. Repositories has a graphical user interface and has an API. And we connected then to what I now call prototype, which is a FAIR data point based on the DCAT2 model. And what it will do, it will basically change this unstructured metadata, or you will hopefully get this unstructured metadata in a structured form that a machine can understand that. And furthermore, yeah, you can have metadata already on multiple levels. So not only, like I showed in the beginning, of the at the level of the FAIR digital of the digital object, but also, for example, at the level of the repository. And yeah, here we reuse also the R3 data schema. So of course we don't reinvent the wheel, that would be sad. But there you can have really a machine that when it arrives at the FAIR data point, it can understand this is a data set from this repository. So, and of course, yeah, like I said before, you can have metadata semantically enhanced. So the machine will understand that if you query a certain thing, that this might also exist in a different language, or that if you, for example, query something for a cat, it might also find metadata that is written for kittens, which is, yeah, if you have a semantic understanding, that will work. If you just query on strings, the machine can never find out that the kitten and the cat is actually the same thing or a similar thing. So one thing that we often ask is what actually is a FAIR data point? And well, what a FAIR data point is doing, it is exposing the metadata of a repository to the outside world. And this is, I want to stress that it's not the data that you store in there, because the data, of course, is stored in your repository. But what you can do with it is you can expose the metadata to the outside world. It will allow a user to discover information, but it is really designed to interact with machines. So you can have both. You have a graphical user interface, but you also have the possibility of interaction with machines. You have actually two different types, well, two different implementations. You can take the specifications of the FAIR data point and just apply them to your repository. So expose the metadata in your needs, or you can just connect your repository to a standalone application. There's none that's better or worse. It's depending a bit on your need. I mean, if you need to extend your schema, that might be some work, but also if you want to deploy a FAIR data point by yourself, it might be some work, but there's none that's better or worse. In FAIRsFAIR, we actually chose for the left, so we build a prototype, and this prototype has actually several components. So we have an API, the triple store, where the metadata is hosted, and we have a MongoDB, which is used for housekeeping data. So for example, you want a user to be able to log in to have a password control, and this is there. And you have a graphical user interface, the web client, where you can basically have a look at the metadata that is stored in the FAIR data point, or even store metadata by yourself. Right now you need a password to access it, but if you say I want to play around with it, you can send us a mail, and then you will get the password, and you can play around and look at the FAIR data point. And also, if you want to have more details, we recently wrote a deliverable, so there is also a possibility to have a look at the web client. We took some screenshots. We talked already about DCAT2, and this is, I think, what is important also now to mention. The DCAT2 is basically changing our metadata into a structured form. So what we will have, we have a data set, which is just a collection of data that can be published or created by a single agent. And we have distributions of a data set. If you, for example, think you have a data set which can be stored in an Excel or in a text file, this is the same data set. It's just different types of different distributions. So a machine can understand, okay, this is now a text file, or this is an Excel file, so I have to do different things with it. Plus you have a catalog, and a catalog stores data sets. So you can group data sets, maybe by a topic. And also there you have metadata about the catalog itself. And last but not least, you have the repository, which is based on the R3 data metadata schema. So this is what's default into DCAT. And you can say, okay, this is boring. What is new about this? The cool thing about DCAT is that this is a very limited metadata, but you can, with knowing a bit RDF and cycle shapes, extend this metadata always to what you need. So if you say, for example, you have a cultural heritage data set which has metadata fields that are not in the normal data in a normal data set, you but you extend the data set with this metadata fields, and the FAIR data point will expose it in such a way that the machine can also understand, oh, there is this new field. It is linked with an URI, so it can be understood by the machine. Or we also had a geospatial data set, and there are more to come in a sense. Here we depend a bit on the repositories itself. If you say, okay, I have some metadata that I want to expose that's not in the standard data set, we can definitely have a look on how to make this. But with this, yeah, as said, your data set or your metadata will become much more interoperable. And yeah, with this, I want to just give a mini glimpse on what's coming soon. So Robert already mentioned that we are working, of course, on having the API, so the metadata also exposed via the API. And there also the idea is to interact with the F-UJI tool to be able to also, yeah, if we expose the metadata via an API, it would be also nice to have it directly evaluated by, for example, F-UJI. And we are also working on being able to make a semantic, well, to have really a good semantic understanding of the fields to be, yeah, to have this really in. So this is a bit what we are focusing now in 2021, that end of 2021, we hope that we have the ideal picture where you query the cat, you will find the kitten. And that's it from my side.
That's great. Thank you very much, Claudia. I think, you know, we will also be picking up a little bit on DCAT and some other work we're doing in FAIRsFAIR, which is looking at metadata catalog integration. So I think we will now move on to our final speaker for today, which is Linus Sapinkas, who is going to be giving us a bit of an overview on how to make your repository more trustworthy. And just while Linus is getting set up, I will just remind people, please feel free to add questions into the chat. And after this, we'll move into the open question and answer session. And with that, I'll say over to you, Linus.
My name is Linus Sapinkas. I work at DANS as policy officer, and today we'll be giving an overview of the work that we do in Work Package 4 with regard to certification of repositories and how to make your repository trustworthy. I will be giving this presentation after having it prepared with Hervé Loers from UK Data Archives. He wasn't able to present, but he might be maybe able to answer some of the questions after the presentation. So first of all, I would like to look at the CoreTrustSeal support program that FAIRsFAIR has launched in the framework of the project and give a short overview of what it entails. So supporting data repositories in their journey towards trust and FAIR is at the heart of FAIRsFAIR project. As you can see in this image, open data and data management policies are becoming commonplace in the global research community. As you can see in this image, FAIR data is becoming much more commonplace, and policies advocating for preservation are also becoming commonplace in the research community. In that respect, data repositories also play a very important role in keeping data fair and over time. So our support program in FAIRsFAIR project is helping repositories in their journey to becoming trustworthy repositories and achieving certification. In this case, CoreTrustSeal certification that makes them enabling in the sense of FAIR. In this certification support program, we support 10 different repositories across Europe in different countries. Our support team in FAIRsFAIR project in the certification domain consists of 5 different organizations: DANS, which I represent, CINES in France, UK Data Archive in the UK, DCC, Digital Curation Center in the UK, and Pangea in Germany. Who do we work with? There are different, as I mentioned, 10 repositories working across Europe, stretching from Bosnia-Herzegovina up to the north to Sweden and from Spain to Germany. These are different partners that we are working on the journey towards making them more trustworthy repositories. Within our support program, we provide a range of different services. These range from support workshops, which deal with specific issues that repositories have in terms of FAIR data. In these workshops, we address these issues. We provide tailored support and also use some practical tools that we have developed together with our colleagues to assist the learning, exchange of knowledge, and also improvement in practices towards becoming CoreTrustSeal certified. We have also implemented test reviews so that repositories participating in our support program were able to practice with each other, filling in certification application forms, doing an inventory of the policies that they have, and also in this way learning from each other and preparing for becoming trustworthy digital repositories. And last but not least, we have been providing on a continuous basis one-on-one support and advice for these selected repositories. Here in this image, you can see the timeline at the, well, this is the stage where we are at with our 10 selected repositories in our certification support program. So currently, our 10 participating repositories are applying for CoreTrustSeal certification. Some of them have already applied. They're now updating us on their progress on becoming certified. We will be publishing a survey in October. The repositories will be reporting on their financial expenditure that was provided for them as part of the preparation for the certification program. We'll be reporting on challenges and lessons learned. In November, we will be organizing our final support workshop. This will be to address the key challenges and lessons learned. And we will also celebrate the achievements of our selected repositories in the way of becoming certified. Before the end of the year and in January 2022, we'll be having one-on-one interviews with each participating repository to discuss one-on-one the key lessons learned, results within the framework of this project. And in March 2022, we will close the project officially. Our certification support program is not in a vacuum. We, as a program, we also engage with different peers working in the domain of trust and FAIR. So here you can see some of the peers on a global level that we have been engaging in supporting repositories and becoming more FAIR enabling. Some of these are RDC network in Australia, Partage network in Canada, as well as American Geophysical Union. And this is, of course, used to share experiences, lessons learned, explore collaboration, different avenues in promoting good practices of data sharing. Now I would like to address a second part of the presentation, which deals with CoreTrustSeal and FAIR work. In this image, you can see the application process for achieving CoreTrustSeal certification, and also the FAIR maturity model and the combination of both. I will not go into the specific stages of application process, but you can see that this CoreTrustSeal certification is mapped to also FAIR data principles, and there's commonalities. Here in this image, you can see the mapping of CoreTrustSeal and FAIR. The current mappings between FAIR and CoreTrustSeal are being reviewed together with the project developments, and we'll be publishing an updated version in the summer. The focus of FAIR objects, the focus of FAIR objects focus on data and metadata objects, and the CoreTrustSeal information about repositories being informed together these different aspects. Digital object management. In this slide, you can see which stage is most important in the life cycle of digital object management, and this is appraisal, quality, discovery, and reuse stages. In regard to CoreTrustSeal certification requirements, we also take new ideas on board. There's integration and elaboration different requirements, and this is being done at different stages. Trustworthy digital repositories have also mandatory responsibilities. In this graph, you can see the types of responsibilities that come along in terms of data preservation. Capability areas of focus. In this graph, you can see that some of the areas of focus in terms of CoreTrustSeal requirements, and taken together, they also present this focus. Capability maturity model. I'm not going to go in depth in this. well, this shows the focus for CoreTrustSeal, and this basically entails for initial, managed, and defined focus. In terms of ongoing work and next steps, to this date, we have designed a statement on capability maturity and engagement. This has been achieved so far. The ongoing work right now is the draft that is being made on the free tier capability levels for CoreTrustSeal, which is currently in a draft mode. We are also revising mapping based on areas of focus, which is also in a draft phase. And there will be consultation with CoreTrustSeal to align ongoing work in work package dealing with FAIR certification and further integration. And that will be due in the summer. Along these lines will be iterations made for the maturity model with change logs, and there will be a report on maturity model towards FAIR data in FAIR repositories. Together, these outputs will inform the update on the current version of CoreTrustSeal certification requirements. Last but not least, there will be also recommendations made for future work with amendments for the next version of CoreTrustSeal, and that will be due in 2022. For further information about the CoreTrustSeal certification program and also FAIRsFAIR certification support program, you can look at the links presented on the slide. Thank you very much. And
That's
apologies
great.
for the technical issues.
No worries. I think we're experiencing new things every day with this lockdown way of working. Thank you very much, Linus. So I think everybody has had a chance to see a little bit of the flavor of some of the work we're doing. I've seen a couple of questions in the chat related to your talk, Linus, and I'm wondering maybe if we could just pick up on those in the first instance, just maybe to share that more broadly. So Karsten, you had asked if we implicitly assume that CoreTrustSeal certified repositories are also FAIR enabling, and I think Ilona and Mustafa gave your response, but I just wondered if maybe either Ilona or Mustafa, if you would like to maybe share that with the broader group.
Yes, sure. Thanks, Joy, and thanks also, Karsten, for the question. So yeah, I in my response in the chat, I said a repository can be FAIR enabling in many ways, and I said repository certification is one way. Of course, I think it's an important way, because if you can demonstrate that you are trustworthy, you can also show this to the outside world. But the important thing is that in our project, we realized that there is a difference between CoreTrustSeal requirements and also the FAIR data principle. So we try to map that, and we try to really see where we can leverage on CoreTrustSeal and extend it with FAIR enabling characteristics. Because in the end then, a repository, it will make the data FAIR, but it would also allow for keeping the data FAIR over time. And that's also very important when we talk about trustworthy repositories.
Yeah, that's great. I think there was a couple more questions on the same topic in the chat. One from Susanna, which is asking Mustafa, can one access the info on which a repository has a CoreTrustSeal badge programmatically?
Yeah, thanks, Joy, and thanks, Susanna, for this question. Actually, this is not so much a question that FAIRsFAIR project is responsible, an issue that FAIRsFAIR project was responsible for, but I can tell you that the CoreTrustSeal board has, I think, the technical capability to connect the so-called application management tool with registries, and that this is the way currently we are exploring with read-free data. So the technical capability exists for that.
That's great. We had another question in the chat from Susanna, and it was about data being archived usually at the end of a publication process or during the peer review stage. And I think the question was more about at which stage should metadata be checked to see if they're good enough to be FAIR. I think this is a really good question. I'm thinking it might be more in line with the F-UJI tool and when you would do an assessment. And I think the question is, how can you check the fairness before it gets to that publication stage? So maybe if Robert Huber, if you had something maybe to respond.
Yeah, so in FAIRsFAIR, we have developed these two tools, and FUJI is clearly only suitable to check data which already is archived. So this is at that endpoint of the data research lifecycle. And in order to assess or to check data which is not yet published, FAIRsFAIR has provided this FAIRsFAIR tool, which can help you to identify what to provide or to raise awareness, what information you need prior to the deposition of that data set in the repository, and what Robert also has shown the data repository recommendation tool, which can help you to find an appropriate repository. But in the end, it is of course then the task of the repository, or it is depending on the capabilities of the repository, if your data is FAIR deposited or not.
I mean, I think it's a really interesting concept, and I think a lot of what we're thinking as we go through the process of developing these tools and thinking about them in a broader context is now trying to think about when you use the different tools, in which order, and who needs to know about it, and when they might be making use of them. So I think as we go through, we'll be trying to make that a little bit clearer as we kind of progress with the project. But I think that's a really interesting point and something that we should definitely pick up on. There were a couple of other points in here related to CoreTrustSeal certification, and let's see, it was from Karsten, just wondering if automated confirmation of CTS certification is included in automated FAIR tests, so example through FUJI.
No, FUJI has a clear focus on the individual data set, so it is not assessing the repository itself. It can, of course, be used to assess the technical capabilities of a repository, but if a badge is given by FUJI, then it will be at the dataset level.
Perfect.
Might be able to jump in, Joy, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so of course, I think then if FUJI takes some data from Re3 data, etc., it would be great. And of course, yes, it would be great if we would have a validation status of the certification, so it's not self-assessed or anything. So yeah, I think we would really like to have this validated, and this was also what Robert Ulrich described in an earlier presentation, that he's working with that with the CoreTrustSeal board.
Great, perfect. I think just to clarify, I don't see any other questions in the chat, but Susanna, have you had all of your questions answered? I think you were the last one to put anything in, so if you have anything that you wanted to say, now's your chance.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you very much. And obviously, we will be very happy to work with the FUJI tool, as we already said, to also connect the standard for fair sharing to improve the assessment. Thank you.
That's great. And just to reiterate, you probably saw in the chat, we do have an MOU with fair sharing, so we're already kind of thinking about how we can work together and then start to join things up. So that's great. I don't see any other questions. Did anybody else have any other questions they wanted to ask now? You can either raise your hand or put it in the chat. And if I don't see anything else, I think we will then maybe just move on, and I will give you one last slide before we can close this session. So maybe if we can move to the next slide, please. And this is just to wrap everything up. So I think you had a very brief overview today of the work that FAIRsFAIR is doing. You can see that we're kind of active in a lot of different areas, touching on a lot of different things that are related to repositories. So we're, as you've heard from everybody, I think who spoke, we don't work alone. We want to work collaboratively. So if anybody on the call today is interested in getting involved, please do reach out to us, and we will consider how we can start to work together a little bit more. One thing I did want to flag up that's coming up next week, actually, we have started a series of repository support webinars. And these are going to be monthly webinars, which will be a maximum of an hour and a half. They're intended to be targeted towards repository managers, but we also think that they'll be useful to a lot of other actors in the FAIR data ecosystem. But it's intended to kind of explore a topic that is relevant to FAIR and to try and give some tips and pointers to how you can consider your practices and to become more FAIR enabling. So the first of these webinars is next week. It's April 21st at 2:30 European time. And that session will be focusing on the role of repositories in enabling persistent identifier graphs. And we'll hear again a little bit from the FREIA project, which just wrapped up, as well as some of the work that's going on in FAIRsFAIR to support this technology. So we'd encourage anybody to come along, and please join up for those. You can actually register to be kept informed as future topics are being added. So we have a couple in the pipeline. One coming up in July, actually, with the FAIR Sharing and RE3 data team to look at how repositories can make better use of registries to make their services more visible. But please do sign up and you'll be kept informed about future topics and timings for these sessions as they're confirmed. So I think that's pretty much everything for today. So thank you very, very much to everybody who's joined. We're delighted to see so many people giving up an hour to come along and to hear about the work we're doing. Thank you so much to all of the speakers for really good and informative talks and for sticking so closely to time. I really appreciate it. And also special thanks to Maria Letizia, who's done all the behind the scenes work on trying to juggle all of the kind of technical stuff to make this run so smoothly. So thank you very much to everybody. And we wish you a good rest of your week. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Bye.